The look of a color film negative photograph can become a moving target. Many variables come into play before a meaningful image is formed, and each step along the way can introduce changes that are often beyond our control. Defining what a specific film looks like can be an elusive task. In this episode of Alchemy Color, I'll explore how to easily create a positive image and the possibility of emulating it with digital cameras, go through some of the shortcomings of the emulation market, and present a unique Alchemy Color product. Stay with us as we explore negative film emulation in this episode of Alchemy Color. The film look is highly coveted, and for good reasons. After scanning all of my color negatives and processing them with software, I rediscovered a whole new world of color. Film negatives hold a wealth of information, and adjusting them in the digital domain has revealed much of their native richness. The non-linearities and high dynamic range of film are charming, unlike the predictability and limited headroom of electronic sensors. It's as if we can deposit a certain degree of freedom and randomness in the medium itself, in opposition to the factual and objective nature of digital imaging. In a single sentence, we simply like the way things look on film. Retrieving a realistic image from a color negative film is an adventure in itself, with several factors that can lead to very different results. Let's explore the common journey of a film photograph and the elements introduced along the way. Keep in mind that these influences are cumulative, carrying forward and mixing with each successive transformation. You load a color negative film in your camera and expose it. Naturally, you'll need to have it developed, which usually happens in a very controlled environment. As long as the film isn't expired and the development process, whether automated or manual, was handled correctly, you can expect predictable outcomes. Without going into the complexities of color negatives, let's just say that you end up with an orange tinted strip with a negative image of the photographed scene. This is the most reliable representation of what a specific film looks like, even though the image is reversed at this point. Our film, Kodak Gold 200, was developed here in Berlin using a Fujifilm Mini Lab. You might want to turn these negatives into digital files. When you scan your film, it will most likely be digitized by a linear CCD, either on a dedicated film scanner or a flatbed scanner. You can also photograph your film with a digital camera. Things get complicated when this negative gets reversed and transformed into a realistic-looking image. Reversing a color negative is a balancing act of color casts and tone curves, often open to interpretation. There are numerous software and plugins that promise better color inversion from color negatives. Some labs offer better results than others, and some people even venture into the maze of manually reversing the image. More on this later. Some conversions will work better than others, and it's important to note that the vast majority of newcomers to analog film will have their films scanned in a commercial lab, inevitably subjecting their images to the influence of an automated system. Fujifilm Frontier is a popular commercial film scanner that will automatically adjust exposure and color balance when scanning film negatives. This automation is a response to consumer demand for viewable images. A film enthusiast can't control these automations, and these are never explicitly mentioned when you order a negative scan. We scanned our film in TIFF RGB on a Fujifilm Frontier scanner, also in RAW DNG using a Plustek 7600i scanner, and in RAW using a calibrated Sony a7 IV. Next, you may want to print these images. You can do it manually in a dark room using photographic paper. This involves loading the negative, setting exposure and color filters on the enlarger head, and then developing the photographic paper either manually or in a mini lab. Alternatively, a commercial mini lab can automate this whole process. The Fujifilm Frontier, again, prints a digital scan of the negative onto photographic paper using RGB lasers. Dry mini labs like the Frontier DE100XT will simply print an inkjet image just like a home printer. Unfortunately, the majority of commercial prints are made from digital sources, which likely underwent processing with automations from the scanning software, rather than reflecting the photographer's intended vision for the image. Given the numerous variables that can sway results in various directions, defining a specific film look can be challenging. We could argue that a carefully processed positive of a cheap negative film can be made to look better than a poorly automated reversal of an expensive one. The pertinent question of what constitutes a better looking image is also subjective. Some people prefer the rolled off highlights, some others prefer denser saturated tones, some prefer more contrast and others less. And all of this can simply be thrown out the window with scanner software automation. While most steps in the process have predictable, measurable characteristics, the cumulative nature of the possible variances at every stage makes color negative film photography an open-ended endeavor. This is the inherent nature of the analog signal path, and all the acrobatics of its reproduction. The market is flooded with products that promise unmatched 99% accuracy, with claims of a delta E of 3.5 or lower, among other assertions. I have tested several of these products, and here's what I found. There is a lack of transparency about the emulation process itself. It's unclear at what stage the film was emulated, whether as a negative, a scanned image, or printed on paper. Was the positive image based on a Frontier scan? Or was it a chemical print? Was it an inkjet print? Was that print measured with a radio spectrophotometer? The answer stands out in this regard, as they've shared videos and blog posts detailing several technical aspects of their process. Any claim of accuracy should be supported by a technical report detailing testing conditions, equipment used, the color difference metric employed, and software specifics. We publish such reports on our website, and each product includes a comprehensive instruction manual with these detailed results. Additionally, some brands even promote themselves and their products with AI-generated images. I would argue that photographing a color chart with precise color data can guide the conversion process and bring us closer to an accurate image. However, fully committing to this approach risks sacrificing the distinct color characteristics of the film, resulting simply in an accurate, yet grainy image. Given the variety of methods for inverting color negatives, how can we authentically capture the unique look of a specific film? Is there a reliable, technically informed method for consistently converting film negatives to digital with predictable outcomes? Here's my proposal for a non-arbitrary color negative film inversion in the digital domain. For this method, you will need Photoshop, and Lightroom is useful but not essential. Part 1. Capture. Color negative film holds information in 3 narrow bands. However, real-world color is made of smooth transitions, which DSLR sensors are designed to capture. This is due to the design of the color filter array, which filters red, green, and blue primaries in a way similar to human vision. Furthermore, the overall purpose of the digital color processing pipeline is to translate real-world color. In contrast, dedicated color-negative film scanners are designed to capture 3 narrow bands of the visible spectrum. One standard that defines these characteristics is called status M. Let's try to bridge the difference between DSLRs and dedicated scanners. Jack Whitaker explores the process of using a narrowband light source for DSLR scans that matches the spectral distribution of film scanners in order to facilitate color reproduction. As we can see from this diagram, 3 peaks are present on the light source of the popular Fuji Frontier SP3000 film scanner. This got me thinking that I could potentially have a light source around me with similar characteristics. I fired up my X-Rite i1 Pro 3 with Babel Color CTNA and measured several screens around the house. Every LED and OLED Apple device I measured exhibit a similar response, so it's fair to say that most screens should give favorable results. That said, for this standard method, I will use my iPad LED screen as a backlight. Camera exposure was set as a median between the spot-metered transparent film base and burnt tip. Depth of field was enough to compensate for any misalignment between the film and sensor, while keeping the background completely out of focus. Part 2. Processing the raw files. Go to my project page on GitHub and download all the materials in a single zip file. Start by installing this preset. For the sake of compatibility, we will be using Adobe Standard as our DNG camera profile and a custom curve that reverses its embedded tone curve. Having a linear tone curve from the onset is essential for the subsequent conversion of negative to positive. Next, white balance the raw image to a bright, neutral area of the negative. In this case, I will pick what I know to be a dark patch on my color checker. Note that the transparent film lead and burnt tip won't accurately represent the neutral far ends of the negative dynamic range. Color negatives have a working range where the balance between channels is fairly linear and equidistant. Under- and overexposed areas exhibit nonlinearities that don't translate into useful image information. Export this photograph as a 16-bit TIFF in Rec 2020 color space. Part 3. Inverting the negative. This is a good time to introduce the color negative inversion technique proposed by Aaron Buchler. I will quickly go over the steps adapted from his work, so if you missed anything, please read his original article first, then my follow-up method on GitHub. Method 1. Invert in Photoshop, edit in Lightroom. Open the exported TIFF file in Photoshop. Convert image to 32-bit. Using the eyedropper tool, I will Alt or Option click on a known neutral bright patch on this color checker. Release the Alt/Option key and click on the darkest patch. This will set the darkest and brightest neutrals of this particular photograph as the background and foreground colors in Photoshop. It's useful to have a photograph of a color checker for this step, particularly if it's exposed to a white point dominant across the whole film roll. This way, you can balance the whole roll based on the data of a single frame. If you don't have a color checker photographed, experimenting with neutral dark and white areas of the same or other frames on the same film roll is encouraged. After that, go to File, Scripts, Browse, and load densitybalance.js. A group with 2 exposure layers has been created. Simply put, these layers further neutralize the orange film base and balance the film's white point. Create a new lookup layer and load the file inverse_01.cube. At this point, you should have a flat positive image. Save your image in 32-bit, import it into Lightroom, and edit to taste. Method 2. Invert and edit in 32-bit in Photoshop. This time let's create a contact sheet. Synchronize settings in Lightroom and export every frame from the same roll as a 16-bit TIFF in Rec 2020. Set the working color space of Photoshop to Rec 2020. If this color space isn't available, check the documentation on GitHub on how to install it in your operating system. Go to File, Automate, Contact Sheet. Set image size, resolution, layout, and color space. Some experimentation will be needed in order to avoid wasted space on large contact sheets. Run action number 1. Just as before, select the eyedropper tool and set background and foreground colors. Using a contact sheet allows for greater experimentation, especially when no color checker is present. Run action number 2. A message will ask you to load the densitybalance.js script. Run action number 3 and locate the file containing the template with all the necessary layers. The exposure/contrast layer is selected by default. Adjust exposure with the exposure slider and contrast with the gamma slider. Finally, adjust color to taste with the layers contained in the color editing group. Creating a custom Inversion XMP profile. Once satisfied with the edits, you can create a LUT with this custom reversal and apply it to TIFF and RAW files directly in Photoshop or Lightroom. Run action number 5. Load the neutral 64-point HALT PNG file. Your custom negative reversal edits will be applied. Rename and save the edited PNG image. Go to this website and click on Convert to Cube. Load the exported PNG image and download the resulting cube file. To create a profile for Lightroom and Photoshop, select the layer containing the negative image, go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, switch off HDR or any other modifications present by default, go to Presets, and Alt/Option click on this icon to create a new profile. Name your film roll. Check that every box is unticked. Click on the color lookup table. Select the cube file you just downloaded. Set the color space to Rec 2020 and the amounts to 100, 100, 100. Save your new profile. The resulting profile can be applied to both RAW and TIFF files from the same film rolled, as long as your images use the same settings as the frame used for the film reversal operations in Photoshop. Color negative scan, specialized method. By creating an accessible, non-camera specific DSLR scan methodology, I had to circumvent some aspects of my initial premise. Is there a non-arbitrary, technically informed method for converting film negatives to positives in the digital domain? To stay true to my premise, some steps have to be improved. 1. Light source and camera raw profiles. Using the Adobe standard profile for DSLR RAW scans works well for most cameras. However, it doesn't perfectly match colors between different cameras or adapt to specific light sources. To improve results, I created a custom profile for my camera using a color chart lit by my iPad screen. This was challenging because the matching software was trying to interpret colors from an unusual light source. Results were better than using Adobe Standard, despite some calibration difficulties like posterization. As mentioned earlier, DSLR sensors are different from dedicated scanner sensors. DSLRs and RAW processing are designed to represent real-world colors. By calibrating the camera to capture accurate colors from a narrow-band light source, the negative is treated more like a real-world object. So I decided to use a high-quality light source, a good color chart, and a custom linear profile for my camera. Using this continuous light source contradicts the earlier method of using an iPad. So what makes this method better? Adobe Standard is a general-purpose profile that's less effective at color separation than my own custom profiles. But when using an iPad as a backlight, the narrow band peaks that align with the film negative layers allow Adobe to only transform relevant information. I use the linear calibrated profile that's available for purchase at alchemycolor.com. It offers high-quality results for both D50 and tungsten light sources. Let's look at examples of different light sources, DNG profiles, and white balance settings applied to negative scans. Two, a better editing color space. According to Aaron Buchler, using one of Ella Stone's custom-made ICC profiles for your editing color space gives better results than Rec 2020. This is especially true for highly saturated colors, which makes the negative inversion process in Photoshop much easier. 3. Specialized workflow. By using Photoshop alongside 3D LUT Creator and various customized techniques, I was able to extract precise color chart data to create accurate film emulations. This method provided the best negative inversions, especially when verified with color charts. I tested this by comparing the converted positive image against the known LAB values of my color checker SG. Here is the delta E comparison of Kodak Gold 200 against the reference values of my color checker SG. At this point, we can create a digital emulation of the converted positive. Here's a rundown of how I created these emulations. What does Kodak Gold 200 look like? Kodak Gold 200, when processed with this method, has a neutral look, with a noticeable emphasis on yellows and oranges, likely the gold aspect of its marketing. This description is widely shared by most users, regardless of the printing, scanning, or inversion method. Contrast is balanced, neither too strong nor too soft, and saturation is moderate to mildly high. Look at these images. Do they look analog or digital? Some of these images are analog, others are digital. This is the delta E value between a negative converted with a specialized method and a digital image emulated to Kodak Gold 200. This emulation offers precise and versatile color transformations for any digital camera. Alchemy Standard emulations are applied over Adobe Standard and come in 3 variants. Linear contrast. As mentioned before, a tone curve compensates the Adobe Standard embedded contrast, allowing for more flexible edits in post. ACR contrast. The emulation adds color and preserves the native tone curve, thus matching Adobe's default contrast. Paper contrast. The paper contrast lookup table used to invert the negative is based on Kodak Endura RA4 paper. This preset emulates that tone curve while keeping middle gray at 49 in the LEB color space. How to use the emulation. Select a raw image, adjust exposure and white balance, and apply the preset. Check for clipped colors, which can be compressed using the point color mixer. The range sliders are preset for high saturation colors and equally distributed across the hue range. The preset loads a set of optimization masks. Film grain and subtle blur soften some of the digital sharpness, adding a smoother, more analog feel, sometimes even creating natural halation. Dynamic range compression can be manually tweaked for better retention of shadows and highlights. Sky Recovery uses Adobe's AI masking to recover color and details in the sky, along with a specific hue compensation for cyan. And finally, highlight roll-offs reduce saturation in the brightest areas. How accurate is this emulation? How good does it compare against our custom film inversion method? What about the frontier scan? Let's look at some images. As we covered before, many variables can influence the look of a specific film when converted to positive, but the most faithful representation of a certain negative film occurs at its most essential moment, the developed negative stage. However, transforming a digital camera raw file to this orange-tinted negative wouldn't be useful at all. Such an emulation likely wouldn't produce an image with all the necessary information for a flexible and accurate conversion to positive. Why would someone want to do this anyway? I would. So that's exactly what I did. Earlier in my screen captures, you may have noticed the existence of an additional preset. This preset loads an emulation that accurately replicates the color of the scanned negative, as seen through the specialized method. Let's walk through the workflow for the negative emulation in Lightroom. Select a raw file, adjust exposure and white balance, and apply the preset. A similar set of masks used in the positive emulation will be applied. Export the file as a 16-bit TIFF in Rec 2020 color space. The resulting files are compatible with Negative Lab Pro, Film Lab, or any other negative inversion software. These images can also be converted to positive with the standard method described earlier. accurate is the emulated RAW file against the negative source image? Here's a color similarity report using a color checker SG. Takeaways. The look of a color negative film can be dramatically changed during the inversion process, especially by scanner software automation. Color negative film reacts to light linearly, similar to digital sensors, hence the need for processing the digital RAW files with a linear profile. The famous S-shaped curve of film comes from the conversion to positive, not the negative itself. With a flat positive image, contrast can be extensively manipulated in the digital domain. A grayscale ramp photographed on negative film is kept fairly neutral as long as it sits inside the film's useful dynamic range. I wouldn't necessarily call Kodak Gold 200 a warm film, but oranges and yellows are brighter and more saturated. Film negative converted to positive retains a lot of saturation in the highlights region, contrary to the popular belief that film highlights are heavily rolled off. Similarly, color negative grain is vibrant and varied, unlike the monochromatic synthetic grain found on Lightroom, for example. Negative film can be color accurate when converted to positive with a specialized method. A well-converted film negative can be more accurate than a digital photograph. Adobe Standard, for example, sits at a delta E of 3.8 with a worse distribution of inaccurate colors. Conclusion. Film negative is far from an ideal reproduction medium. And when compared to color-accurate digital images, it's clear that much of the analog aesthetic arises from its inherent nonlinearities. The analog signal path can become complex and acrobatic in nature, and some of the appeal comes from the lack of a single formula. The same film can yield a variety of distinct looks. This brings to mind Marshall McLuhan's famous book, The Medium is the Message, or perhaps we should say the massage. Just like the typo in the book's first edition, we often find inspiration in our mistakes. Analog photography can feel like a lottery at times, so I hope this video helps you take control of your results. Film color often eludes definition. That is why we've decided to emulate film negative at its most fundamental state before being inverted. On the other hand, our simple yet powerful inversion methodology extracts the natural look of a specific film, in response to an otherwise arbitrary process with unpredictable results in automations. I am sure that you'll find these emulations will look really good on your images. Do you have a specific film that you would like to see emulated? What about supported digital cameras? Do you want to test these emulations with your images? Send me some raw samples and I will get back to you with the results. Let's start a conversation in the comments. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.